On today's episode of Hungry for Wisdom, they're just words. Relax, said the guy getting hanged for hate speech. The tongue is too small to be that important, said the temporary insignificant speck of bio dust claiming to have inherent dignity. And two guys who talk for a living tell you should talk less. This is what we call hypocrisy. It's episode 72. Turn it up! See, I should have told you before I was going to say that, because now you're like, oh, that hurts. That stings a little.
It does.
I know, it stung when I wrote it.
Yeah. But the theme music was a balm.
It's a little cathartic.
A little balm for my soul.
Yeah.
Especially that solo.
It's like an audio punching bag.
Little squeal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, episode 72 is dedicated to The Parlor. The Parlor, I say, which is it's the Parlor Hairworks, Spa, and Tattoo. For those of you who are not fundamentalists, this is a buddy that he's a neighbor of one of our church members, and anyway, he's a believer, but he goes somewhere, I don't know. Anyway, he opened up a shop down there next to Indulgences on Van Giesen in that little like Van Giesen strip mall thing.
Oh, really? It's over there.
Yeah. And so he'll take care of your beard for you. So I want to see. I haven't actually asked him yet. I wanted to call him before we did this episode, but I didn't have time because I was rushing here in the morning. And I wanted to call him and see if he can do a straight razor shave for me before I hit the mission field.
Oh, yeah.
That would be boss. Anyway.
Dude, there is nothing like a good straight razor shave.
Tell you what. And it's a skill. I mean, you try and do it yourself. It doesn't. You got to practice. It doesn't work out right.
Back when I only sported a goatee, I would do straight razors.
Would you?
Yeah, and it was so. I mean, your skin is like baby butts.
Yep.
It is nice.
Yep.
But now that I sport the beard,
well, and it takes time. That's the thing. It's like, I got a bunch of kids. Anyway, so the Parlor down on Van Giesen. Love shouting out these local businesses. If you are in Tri-Cities, go and see my man Josh down at the Parlor. Interesting little factoid about this. My father-in-law comes into town, and he will wait to get a haircut until he can go see Josh at the Parlor. He'll drive into town for other stuff he's doing. Yeah, and then he's like, okay, I'm not getting a haircut because I got to go to Tri-Cities in 2 weeks, and I'm going to go see Josh. Loves the guy.
Cool.
So anyway, yeah, solid dude. Go see him at the Parlor. Let's get into some wisdom. All right, guys, we got Proverbs 4, verse 24. Only one verse today because it's that good. Proverbs 4:24. Put away from you crooked speech and devious talk far from you. Ah, yes. The old tongue, sharper than a sword, more slippery than a slug that it disgustingly resembles. Crazier than a red-headed ex-girlfriend. And, as Solomon points out, devious. You might say, so crooked that you could open a wine bottle with it. So corrupt it could run for office. So...
A red-headed ex-girlfriend?
I don't know. I don't have any red-headed ex-girlfriends, but I've heard stories. So to fight this tendency to let it get out of control, really? This resonates with your experience?
Wasn't always a pastor.
I'm learning so much about you in front of everybody. So to fight this tendency to let your tongue get out of control, Solomon has a very simple piece of advice. Don't. All right, the Hebrew word for crooked and devious, these two words are interchangeable, really. It basically means the opposite of anything that could be considered straight shooting. All right, so here's my advice, and we're going to come back to this again and again as we go through Proverbs. Just say what you mean. Just lay it out there, man. All these temptations to skirt the issue, soft pedal the truth, talk your way out of a sticky situation, they basically end up being devious most of the time. And it's just not worth it, right? So listen to some contrasts here in the Bible and see who you would rather be like. Genesis 3. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast in the field, and Yahweh God, that Yahweh God had made. And he said to the woman, did God actually say you shall not eat of the tree in the garden? All right, now contrast that with 2 Corinthians 4:2. But we have renounced disgraceful and underhanded ways. We refuse to practice cunning or tamper with God's word, but by the open statement of truth, we would commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. All right, let's look at Mark 14. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. Now contrast that with John 18. Jesus says, I've spoken openly to the world. I've always taught in the synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I've said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. All right, so which of these guys has a more clear conscience? Who got to look themselves in the mirror later? Right? And I'm not asking you how the situation ended. I'm asking you who got to go to sleep that night.
Yeah.
Those who lay it all on the line and talk straight, or those who try to control the outcome of a situation by getting all clever in their speech. And Solomon isn't talking about lying here. He's talking about being devious. That's different. Lying is a part of that, but being devious is bigger because you can say true things in a manipulative way, right? He's talking about being slippery and hard to pin down and non-committal. You know, when somebody talks in such a way that, like, later on they're planning to say, "Nuh-uh, that's not what I said." That's like the progressive church's move. That's Rob Bell's move, right? I'm not saying that about God. I'm just asking a question. You're putting words in my mouth. Devious little imp. He's tall for an imp. Very impish, though. To approach conversations like that, though, you have to assume that you're the smartest guy in the room and that you're going to be able to bend these people to your will if you just get your words right. And some people can do that for a long time because they're really clever, but eventually it always catches up with you, and it never ends well. So, take it from me. I have to talk for a living, which actually is not really a good thing to do if you can help it, right? Like Proverbs 10:19, it says, "In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but the wise man restrains his lips." And so there's a lot of warnings for teachers in the Bible because it's a dangerous thing to do. So don't talk that much if you can help it. Me and Ben that's one of the tools that God has given us to make disciples, but it's a dangerous thing to do, man. So, I do have to talk for a living. And so there's a lot of chance to get myself caught in my own verbal thicket.
Yeah.
But when I'm done talking, I do have worries about things, right? I worry that I haven't done well or that I haven't communicated something clearly or I feel guilty that I said this or that or whatever. But one thing I don't worry about is being found out for who I really am. I don't worry about being discovered or somebody picking up on one of my deep contradictions that I thought I snuck past them. It just doesn't weigh on me.
Yeah.
Because I may be brash, I may be loud, I may be annoying, I may be uncouth. I forgot where I was going with this.
But
I'm not devious, right? So I get to sleep at night. And just take it from me. This is a word of testimony. Boy, does it feel good to not have to worry about being caught up in a lie. So be free. Say what you mean. Let me end this with an extended quote from James chapter 3. Verse 2, "We all stumble in many ways. And if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. But no man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. All right, guys. So let the serpents of the world be crafty and clever. You just shoot straight. Say what you mean. Lay it out there. Use diplomacy and manners as often as you can without compromising truth and clarity, but let truth reign supreme. We're going to seek to do just that as we get into some pastoral questions. Let's see. You can write these into us over text message like this first one. This first one was just given to us by text.
Wow.
Yeah. Or, whatever. Email us or something, office@graceandtruthcommunity.com. You can try and hit us up on Twitter, but frankly, I wouldn't.
Well, I would encourage you to consider hitting us up on Twitter because you actually might get your question answered live-ish.
Yeah, live-ish. So, I don't think I told you we were doing this.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what happened, guys. Next week, you're going to hear an episode where we commit to take questions live on Twitter. but we recorded that episode first because I had the document formatted for the show sheet. And so we're referring to the future because
I was prophetic.
This is the time warp. Whatever. We just confused everybody. Let's just move on. Pastor Ben, the bearded beaver. I am happy, my brother, to see you.
It is good to be here.
What do we got?
Again, for the first time.
On episode 72, because we definitely haven't recorded episode 73 yet.
Not even close. Okay, so we have some thises and that's. We have from our friend Brian, the Peruvian Texan.
That is quite a mix.
That is a mix.
He gets profiled everywhere.
Man, I bet you. Yeah, wow. Okay, so I enjoyed the Mount Rushmore episode you dropped today.
Buenos dias, y'all.
I'm not going to try it with a Peruvian Texan accent here. So here's this question. I enjoyed the Mount Rushmore episode you dropped today and was wondering if you might consider a topic for a future show. As a parent of 5, I have 3 children in Christian schools, but my middle 2 require a school that's more beneficial to their learning because of ADHD. As parents, we understand we can't rely solely on the church to fill our kids' spiritual cups. Can I say an amen to that?
Thank you.
Yes. Families, please. Again, the church, we're not a vendor of religious goods and services, which includes the tutelage of your children. That is incumbent upon us. That's what I mean, you got Deuteronomy, 6:4
We
and
are
following.
Ephesians 4:12.
Yeah.
We are here to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. We can equip you to do your job. We can't do it for you, parents.
Amen.
Brian, the Peruvian Texan,
We
you
like
rock.
that. Exactly. So here's this question. I think this might be helpful for our parents out there. What would be your Mount Rushmore of biblically sound kid books for elementary, middle, and high schoolers? What would be your Mount Rushmore books of successful Christian parenting and preparing our children for the world as young adults? So that's essentially the question. What is our Mount Rushmore for for kids and maybe teens?
Okay.
And then
So we got
for
2
parents.
categories here. So we got parenting, and then we've got books for kids to
Books
read.
for kids, or it could even be. I would even interpret that as books you can read with your kids.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what. Let's not do a full Mount Rushmore for each of these because we can break this up into 3 categories. We'll give 1 or 2 for starting points.
Sounds good.
For young kids, adolescents,
Yep.
and then parents.
Yep.
Say so? Okay,
Yeah.
Here we go. Young kids. I am going to go with, so let's say, I don't know what, 10 and under?
Yep.
Okay.
Sounds good.
One of them is going to be, this is going to sound weird, God Made All of Me. You know that book?
Is that by Nancy Pearson? No.
No, that was Love Thy Body.
Okay.
God Made All of Me is a book by Justin and Lindsay Holcomb, I think. Did it.
Yes.
I think they did that.
Yeah.
Maybe I just heard about it from Justin Holcomb. I don't remember. Anyway, but yeah, it teaches kids. It's really a protection mechanism, is what it is. It protects them from groomers and pedophiles and things like that. But it just goes through the image of God. Here's how your body is made, and it teaches you all the body parts and the real names for them and things like that. And it kind of makes it so that kids aren't if they internalize these concepts, it makes it so that they're not so enticed by the harmful and filthy humor as you grow up, and that they're able to recognize inappropriate activity from adults. And so that sets people up. Now, the reason I go here is because when kids are violated in any sense at a young age, it puts so much scar tissue on them later on, as is all too common, and everybody knows that if we can take care of them, if we can disciple them in that way young, that opens up so many doors for them later on in life. So I'm going to go with God Made All of Me, which is a little bit obscure, but I'm a big fan of. And then I'm going to say Big Truths for Young Hearts.
Bruce Ware.
Yeah, Young Hearts or Young
I think
Minds.
it's young minds or little hearts. I forget.
Okay,
Exactly.
Big Truths for whatever.
Look up
by
Bruce Ware.
Bruce Ware, W-A-R-E. And it's a systematic theology in, I'd say, 10-year-old language.
Yep.
Big concepts.
Yeah.
Right? But he does about as well as anybody can to break it down.
Yep.
So, yeah, as far as like discipling goes, I have put that, not all of my 10-year-olds were readers, but a couple of them have been so far. I got a couple more 10-year-olds coming up, but I had a lot of kids, man. I got to deal in percentages in my household. But yeah, if my 10-year-old is a reader, I put that in their hands, and it's been a good one.
Yeah. I would say I'll shoot for a little bit more of the younger side of things. One book I found really helpful, and again, this would be like something that I would probably read to my child.
Yep.
Right. So one of the things we did was we read the Jesus Storybook Bible.
Jesus Storybook Bible. Sally Lloyd Jones.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Again, both from the standpoint of a lot of your kids' Bibles, right? They tend to either
suck.
Yeah, they kind of tend to gloss over certain things or maybe interpret things to make them a little bit more family friendly, as it were. Like they have to G-rate the Bible or something like that. Which the Bible's got some pretty dark stuff in there. But when it comes to Sally Lloyd Jones and how she presents these things, she's always layering the shadow of the cross or shadow of the gospel, and I find it very, very helpful. And then honestly, Pilgrim's Progress.
Solid move.
Yeah, I'd read it. I think it's something that I'd encourage reading that to your child before 10 and then handing them maybe a contemporary English version of that and have them read it post 10. It's an excellent allegory of the Christian life. Just solid in so many ways. So written by John Bunyan a long time ago.
Yeah. And
I would encourage those. So yeah.
Yeah, also let me throw out, because I just read this to my kids and it was really good for probably 8 and below. 9 and below, Jack's 9. The Biggest Story by Kevin DeYoung.
Yes.
Have you seen it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great one.
Although there's a couple pictures in that get pretty dark when he talks about sin. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
I have never seen animation like they did in this book.
Yeah.
It's a completely different style than anything I've ever seen
It's
before.
beautiful.
Amazing.
Yeah. Can I throw one more out? The Good Catechism.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, dude. How did I miss that?
You know
why? Because I'm not liturgical. Skipping ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, you get one of the, again, this is part of this is just, it's just the idea of being able to help teach our kids doctrinal truths. Again, Heidelberg, highly recommended. The language, depending upon what English version you get, could be a little dated and a little hard.
We do have a catechism for kiddos that we put out at Grace and Truth.
We do, and we also have we also, through our Sunday school curriculum, we run through New City Catechism, and if you're a member at Grace and Truth, or if you have a child in our kids ministry, you will get an email that has questions and answers. Again, catechism, that word tends to scare people. It's essentially a word for teaching, and it really follows the form of a question and an answer. Yep. That's really what it is. If you're thinking we're doing something high church, liturgical, smells and bells and all that kind of stuff, that's not what we're doing. We're just saying, hey, this is how we can help impart biblical truths through the idea of questions and answers.
Yep, there you go. Okay, so then adolescent side of things.
Here we go.
Books for them to read or read with them. I mean, honestly, man, especially if you're homeschooled, this is really easy to work into the fold there. The catechism is part of the curriculum.
Yep.
That's
absolutely
tough to beat. And then having them look up the scripture references with it and things like that just gets them some biblical fluency. Let's see. I'm going to go with, in the adolescent phase, I would give them Mere Christianity.
Totally.
I think that's a good time for that. Okay, I'm going to break this out by gender here. So for girls, who's that lady? Oh, no. I might need to call my wife. Who's it? Here, you do yours. I'm going to call Emily.
Okay, so one I was thinking of was, this is a bit of an older book. I'm not even sure if it's still in print. There's a book called "Don't Check Your Brains Out at the Door" by Josh McDowell, and highly apologetic, but it answers a lot of those basic questions that you get when you're, especially at a junior high or a high school level, you're bringing out these questions that they're going to ask. Does God answer prayer? Does it matter which God I pray to? Things like that. So it's a really good book. The second one, it's a little bit more advanced. I'd probably toss this towards the upper end of adolescence to high school, and that is a book called Every Thought Captive by Richard Pratt. And it's a great book on what we call presuppositional apologetics. Now, that's a particular vein of apologetics, but I find it very helpful because it helps structure a mindset and a worldview that is rooted in the Scriptures itself. The Scriptures are what reveal truth, and so I found both of those books rather helpful. Again, they're both. It's a workout, but honestly, when it comes to our kids, I think there's so much that wants to make their brains lazy. It would absolutely be worth it to help them stretch those categories just a little bit more. And just because I'm a big fan of the book, I would encourage even just looking at Gilbert's "What Is the Gospel." I think that's really appropriate.
And Who is Jesus?
Yep, absolutely.
Those are tiny.
Yeah, and What Is the Bible? I think he's got that third one.
Yeah, I haven't read that one.
Yeah, it's all of them super helpful. So you've got a lot of good resources out there. And again, if you can do them in short doses, again, because you're dealing with adolescence, right, and attention spans and all that kind of stuff, but give them a sense of accomplishment having finished a particular book, that'd be great.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm going to go the fiction route is what I'm going to do.
Oh, yes.
All right? So for boys, I'm going to say give them something by Cliff Graham. You ever heard of this cat?
Oh.
All right, let me blow your mind here for a second. So Cliff Graham wrote, I think it's called the Lion of War series, and what he did was he took the stories of, so he's, if I got the story right, he's an old Marine or something, and so did a bunch of deployments and this and that. And then he got back and he was reading the Bible and he was like, dude, these are like, he says, I've got war stories, but these are better war stories. And so he decides he's going to write. And so he wrote the stories of David and the mighty men. And he's got one in the shadow of the mountain or something. It's about Caleb. And he just wrote a fictional account of Caleb in the Bible. And they are amazing.
Which again, just a side note, Caleb is a stud.
Right?
In the Old Testament.
Doesn't get enough credit.
You read through the Old Testament law, first 5 books of Moses, and you all of a sudden you hit, I think it's like Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and you read this story of Caleb and how the Israelites, they didn't want to go into the land, all that kind of jazz. I think it's Numbers, actually. And you get into all of that, and Caleb says, nope. And God allows him to live.
Yep.
So he actually survives the wandering in the wilderness. And then at 80 years old, he's like, I'm going to go take that hill.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, you're 80.
Time to go kill some dudes.
We have a president that's 80. I'm not sure I'd necessarily put a gun in his hand and say, take a kill. But all of a sudden, Caleb's like, dude, I'm taking it. It's going.
Yeah.
And he's a stud, right?
I love that guy. Yeah. Yeah. So for boys, anything by Cliff Graham, I think, is going to be really, really healthy for them because not only does it help them, I mean, they're page turners, man. They are so good. Like, I can't put them down. And, not only is it going to have them engaging with biblical material, but it's going to excite them about manly things. I mean, he gets into everything in there from how, from the relationship between Uriah and Bathsheba and how they got married. And it's like all appropriate for teenagers to read, but it's good values. And then the war scenes are so cool. I heard a long time ago that they sold the movie rights to him, but I haven't seen any movies from him lately, and I was all excited about it. But yeah, Lion of War, that's the only title I can remember. But yeah, Cliff Graham, dude, get your boys on some of that. And then I just called Emily to try and figure out what those books are that I haven't read any of them because they're for girls, but they're like Christian books for teenage girls. And it's basically like Little Women type stuff, but from a Christian worldview. And Emily grew up on them, and she's having trouble remembering the name right now of the author, and so am I. And anyway, she said, I'll send it to you when I get it, but she's looking for him on the shelf right now. So there is something. I'll put that on a future episode, but it won't be 73 because we may or may not have already recorded episode 73. But I'll get that back out there for adolescent girls. Okay, so then for parents, so Christian parenting. What
high schoolers? Do we want to, or are we?
I would give all that to high schoolers.
Okay.
Yeah. I just decided to dip into the fiction well for a second.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Cool.
And yeah, in Mere Christianity. Like, okay, Christian parenting books. What's on the Mount Rushmore for that?
I'd probably say Shepherding a Child's Heart by the Trips. Yeah.
Yeah. True. I mean, Vodi Bakum has some really good stuff just conceptually about what the family is. Family shepherding is worth the read.
Maybe another one when the title is weird. It says When Good Kids Do Bad Things.
Yep.
But Jim Neuheiser and Elise Fitzpatrick. I think that's a very helpful one, especially if you've got a teenage child that is maybe struggling with listening, with faith and with things like that. Just very, very helpful, very gospel centric. That would be helpful, especially if you're struggling with a teenager. Like the Christian Counselor's Handbook, and it's got various themes, almost like a Bible promise book or something like that.
There's a ton of those. Those are fine. Yeah. Those are good. Yeah. Well, whatever. Move on to the next one.
All right. Okay. So from Fast Fingers Johnny, what does the term evangelical mean?
Who freaking knows?
Oh my gosh.
Dude.
And if I ever If the news media could stop using that term to describe just this various swath of like Christianity,
Trump voters.
Oh my gosh! Can we please stop this? Yes.
I'm so mad at this. It's a fair question at this point.
It is.
All right, so here's the problem, guys. Let me break this down. Evangelical means different things in different conversations, right? Because it's like evangelical as opposed to what? And so it's used totally differently. So here's how it started. There were liturgical churches and there were evangelical churches. So your Lutherans and Episcopalians and Anglicans and those guys, when you get together for a worship gathering, the main focus was the liturgy. It was the order of worship that you're going through, right? And then you had this other movement like the Baptists and the Evangelical Free Church and these guys that would get together, and their main focus was on the gospel. So gospel in Latin is evangelium, which comes from Greek evangelion. And so those were the evangelical churches. They were focusing on the gospel as opposed to the liturgical churches, which were focusing on the liturgy. Now, liturgical churches have the gospel, and evangelical churches have liturgies, as we'll talk about in a minute. But the question is, where's the emphasis, right? So in an evangelical church, according to this paradigm, the liturgy could flex. It was what they call free form, which does not mean no form. It just means free form. The liturgy could flex to communicate the gospel however was most helpful. In the liturgical churches, then the liturgy was and is rigid and fixed, and then the gospel fits into that structure somewhere, but you're going to observe the structure. Now, the structure includes gospel in it, like I said. But anyway, so that was the first kind of distinction. You've got evangelical versus liturgical, but it was all inside of Christianity. Yeah. Then,
because terms change.
Yeah, and that is a natural thing. I mean, language shifts over time. But then something happened where evangelical, I think this might have been, my history's not really solid here. I think this might have been somewhere around the Jesus movement in the 70s in Southern California with the Calvary Chapel stuff.
I
think so. Yeah, evangelical came to mean we're going after the gospel and everything else can kind of make it to the list or not. So it was like all we're going to do is focus on Jesus. It's all about Jesus, dude. It was like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of good that came out of that, right? Because you've got the you had all these movements that were fighting with each other. You had the charismatic movement, which got so weird and so crazy and so outside of, and so untethered from the biblical text. And then you had the fundamentalists, which came back to answer that. And they were so focused on the text that they sort of roboticized doctrine and sort of in some ways did away with the relationship between us and God, where it was just a matter of nailing down the mechanics of the gospel. And so then between the charismatics and the fundamentalists, you had the evangelicals who they would say love Jesus, love the Bible, love the Holy Spirit and everything that he does, and are just not going to freak out about any of it to the point where they start sniping at each other. So that you would say, are you a fundamentalist? No, I'm an evangelical. Are you a charismatic? Well, maybe I've got some charismatic leanings, but really I'm just a normal evangelical Christian. So it was trying to carve out this middle road between, the fights. Then all of that kind of fizzled in the 90s to the point where everybody was kind of tired, so they quit fighting about it so much and just said, okay, here's the camps. I'm more on the fundy side and I'm more on the I'm more on the charismatic side. Fine. We're all basically evangelicals. We love the Bible, we love Jesus, we love the gospel, and we're going to move forward with our disagreements. And, there's some skirmishes every now and then, but evangelicalism sort of encapsulated all of that.
Yeah.
And then came Trump.
Well, I would say even maybe a little bit before you have the rise of the moral majority or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Where you've got he was the
Pat Robertson,
and Jerry Falwell, and then the guy Richard. There was the late 90s. Wasn't moral majority. It was like the religious right, right?
Yeah.
And so the news media would group anybody who was a conservative and a Christian.
Yep.
And they would go into that group.
So then evangelicalism was a voting block rather than a set of doctrinal convictions.
Yeah, and so it became if you're quote Christian, then you were part of this religious right, which generally was associated with Republican values or something like that. Because I mean, and again, as a Christian, if you have your choice between two different parties, and one party is pro pro-choice or pro-abortion,
Murdering babies.
Yeah, one party is, hey, let's preserve life, let's preserve law and order, and all these kinds of things. You might tend to lean that way. Now, I'm not making necessarily a political statement. This is what the news media would route essentially most of your evangelical Christians into.
Yeah.
As a voting block.
Yeah, and the way that they talk about it is, okay, this candidate is going after the evangelical vote.
Yeah.
Right? So that's when they get up and they quote 2 Chronicles 7:14, and if we just turn from our ways, God will forgive us and you'll have jobs if you vote for me because that'll represent repentance. And that's, it got politicized to a very large degree. And then what happened, I think, with Trump was that it became because of the time in which the Trump thing happened, it was post Twitter and social media hitting the scene, which means that all thoughts had to be reduced to 140 characters or less. And so there was no room for any kind of nuance about what anybody believed. And so evangelical kind of, like, nobody really defines this stuff. It's not written on paper anywhere, but just kind of the way the word was used, it kind of became this set of assumptions about what you believe, right? And if you're not conservative and Christian, then evangelical means that, and I'm obviously painting with a broad brush here. Evangelical means you vote for Trump, you love America and fear every other country. You're probably a bit of a racist, although you wouldn't identify yourself as that, and you hate gay people, right? And Jesus was white. That's what it means if you're on the outside of it. And then if you're on the inside of evangelicalism, it means, listen, we've gotten away from our Judeo-Christian values, and any incremental step back in that direction, even if we have to compromise on who we put in the office, but they're going to take our social mores back that direction at all, then that's something that represents faithfulness to God, is to vote for that. So basically what I'm saying is evangelicalism as a term kind of doesn't really mean anything anymore.
Which is frustrating.
Yeah, it's
because
sad.
the word itself, gospel-like, right, or gospel-driven, I mean, good golly, we have to have that. I mean, and yet, I would classify myself under the technical idea as an evangelical Christian.
Totally.
Absolutely. But then I have to parse that out because of how it's portrayed in social media, how it's portrayed in news media, how it's, does that mean that I'm a fervent Trump voter or something like that, and that I find that frustrating because that tends to pigeonhole me in certain places, and in some ways even tends to in some ways it can be even classified as hypocritical because it's like, hey, you're a Christian, you believe in marriage and family values, and yet the guy you vote for doesn't seem to represent that.
Yeah, but you only get one word to broadcast
exactly
what your opinion is on 17 different social and political issues, and it's like, the world just sucks, basically. Yeah. So that's why evangelical doesn't mean much at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's a big loss.
It is.
Now, here's a question. What should evangelical mean?
It's committed to the gospel.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Is it worth reclaiming or not? I don't even want to get into that. Never mind. Move us on.
I will.
I've wondered before what a better term would be to replace it now.
Gospel. I like Wilson's gospel driven, but
I don't.
Yeah.
I think 10 years ago that would have been fine, but now a whole lot of guys that say they were gospel driven. Yeah, that's
true. Well, it's the same way with you have I totally get it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Christ-centered was one that gets used a ton and can mean a number of different things. Yeah.
What I ended up leaning on a lot is just the word disciple. Because it's not used enough to be battered around and misused a whole lot, and so it's still, the term disciple is still something of a blank slate when it comes to the baggage that it carries.
Yeah. It's interesting because you also maybe group that. I know that in a number of, and particularly countries where there's a heavy Islamic presence, they'll say they won't say Christian, because that in many ways that either equals a Roman Catholic or that equals something that is vastly crazy, instead of, okay, I'm a follower of Jesus the Messiah, right? Which I would embrace that title. I'd love it. I mean, that's great. But either a disciple, follower of Jesus, or something like that. But again, those are wordy things, and they don't fit into like a 140 character tweet,
right,
or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll jump into our last question from Anna. We don't do liturgical stuff at Grace and Truth. Really? Is that a matter of conviction or just a matter of style?
We do liturgical stuff. I think there's a misunderstanding about what liturgy actually is. So I alluded to this a second ago. Free form does not mean no form. So we have a liturgy. A liturgy is simply an order of worship.
Yeah.
Right? Now, us being on the more classically evangelical end of things, our liturgy is not a matter of conviction. It's a matter of practicality. And I've got to be careful in saying that because we are not pragmatists in the sense that we will do whatever, quote, works. Bringing honor to God is a primary issue. Now, it is the primary non-violatable concept when we gather together. If we're doing something that dishonors God, we need to stop. Now, how we honor God inside of the worship service, we have a lot of room for freedom with that. So then the question becomes, what's the best way to communicate the gospel? So like our liturgy, we don't usually use that word a whole lot because we're not super formal or rigid about it. But our liturgy is essentially we open up with either a scripture reading or a reading from the catechism or one of the creeds. And then we pray and then we sing and then we read the text for the day and then we preach.
We greet one another.
Usually.
But, yeah.
And I don't know that that's so much a liturgical point. It's just, maybe it is. I mean, just a time to practice some Christian hospitality and love. I suppose so. Yeah. And then we hear the preaching of the word, and then we respond in song, and then there's, usually some announcements thrown in there, and then there's a benediction.
Yeah.
That's a liturgy, right? So, yeah.
Now, but to get into why might we be classified as a non-liturgical church, for example, is that we're not into like the smells and the bells and the highly structured and even memorized rehearsals of, for example, sometimes you'd say, the Lord be with you, and the congregation would repeat back, and also with you, right? Or, but we do have some of those. For example, when we say He is risen,
He is risen indeed,
right? So,
and we created our own liturgies. What do you do when you disagree with God?
Change your mind.
That's more of a catechism, I think.
Yes. So there are some aspects where, we're not necessarily high church, and again, the high church is that highly structured, sometimes deeply theological and poetic, rehearsed, delineated, schedule, and even so much so that some liturgical churches even have like a preaching schedule, right?
Yep.
You preach on certain themes and even preach certain sermons on certain days.
A lot of the Lutherans will do that, which is an advantage to like snowbirds, for example. If they're Lutherans, if they drive from here down to Arizona, they know what sermon they're getting because it'll be picked up on the sermon that they heard last week in Seattle, right? So it's a big organized deal in those liturgical joints. But we do. I mean, liturgy is not something that we're casual about around here. It's just we see it more as a tool to be used in order to communicate the gospel because we are by conviction evangelical.
And I think we make that decision both based upon style, but there are some convictions that go along with it. For example, some of the repeatable stuff, like, asking people in the congregation to repeat certain prayers or certain call and response kind of liturgies. We're not necessarily excited about having people maybe say something that they're not really theologically committed to.
Right. We don't want to. We push that line when we sing together.
Yes,
but at the same time, it's like when we repeat something and we have everybody repeat it, back to us. That is saying these are our convictions as a group, and the fact is, there's a lot of people in there that we don't know yet because because they're visiting or they're new in town or they're not saved yet or whatever. And so it's like, do we really want to set these people up for that? And when we're singing at the beginning of service or at the end, people can leave and get a cup of coffee if they're not comfortable in there. And some people do when they're not saved. When you look at a group of, when you look at a group and say, repeat after me, Jesus is God. And you got a guy who's a Mormon in there. I want him to agree with that statement. But that's an awkward position for him to be in. So we've decided not to push that one.
Yeah. And again, that's style, that's choice. We're not saying that our liturgical friends, our high church friends are in any sin or anything like that.
Got a great deal of appreciation for them.
Absolutely. In fact, some of my most memorable services I can think of are ones where we've done call and responses and things like that.
Yeah.
But that's where we've kind of come down at Grace and Truth.
Yeah. And to give a shout out to the high church guys. One of the best devotional books you'll ever read is the Book of Common Prayer by Thomas Cranmer.
Oh, totally.
Anglican.
Yep.
Anglican to the core, right?
Beautiful.
Yeah, Luther's Catechism. Dr. Stuart Sheehan, the president of World Hope Ministries International, his PhD dissertation was on the history of liturgy, essentially. And so he turned it into a book, and it's called Worship from the Ground Up. And he just goes through all of these different religious services, religious service, worship service convictions, which gets into liturgies and stuff throughout history from the earliest church. And it is a fascinating read. Not only what people did, but why they did it. Just incredible stuff. Like, to what degree you take a look at like sacerdotalism, for example, which is where the priest worships for you and you watch because he's your representative. And he says Protestantism showed up to kick back against sacerdotalism and say, no, what about the priesthood of all believers, right? Yeah. We participate in worship and have equal access to the throne room of God, even as the guy up front in the collar, right? And then he makes the point that, like, yeah, but when you go to a church and the lights go down everywhere except on the stage, and they're going to sing the same whether you're there or not. We've reinstituted sacerdotal worship because the rock star on stage with the skinny jeans and the faux hawk, he's the important one in the room. Everybody else is incidental in that worship service. He says, same thing. We've become the thing that we hate as Protestants.
You reminded me also of D.A. Carson's Worship by the Book, where he
go.
talks about even Calvin's liturgy. And the interesting thing is, a church liturgy, there's differences, right? You have, like, Calvin's was very short on singing at the front. Then there was the message, and then there was singing at the back. Like, it was a response to what we have just heard from the Word. We do that same thing here at Grace and Truth, but the response is a bit more abbreviated.
Yeah.
And some of that is just because of culture, and some of that even can... It's interesting you trace some of these lines even into, like, revivalism, right? You bring people in with a lot of songs, a lot of happy dappy stuff, and then all of a sudden you nail them with the gospel, and then you provide a song of commitment or something like that.
And that makes sense to us in our culture as to what church is, like what we do, right? Yeah, I did Calvin's thing before you got here years ago. I was the only pastor, and everybody was showing up late, and so I said, because it seemed to me like they were saying, we don't value the music, that's just warm up. We value the preaching of the word. So if they were late for the music, it didn't matter. So clever me, I said, all right, well, I'm going to preach first and we'll sing afterwards. Worked back in the day, Calvin did it in Geneva, so we'll just do that. So I would get up, I'd read a scripture, we would pray, and then I would preach, and then we'd sing 5 songs or whatever it was at the end. And I was like, that'll get people to show up on time.
No.
Not a chance. They would just show up partway through and be confused the whole time because they didn't hear the reading of the text up front.
Yeah.
I abandoned it.
Yeah. Man.
Is that all we got?
That is all we got.
That's all we got.
Dear friend.
Wow. All right. Hey, we were efficient on that one.
We were.
Hey, Jesus deserves disciples, and I'm going to get us out of here because I got to sneeze. Bye.
Hungry for Wisdom is a ministry of Grace and Truth Community in West Richland, Washington. You can find out more about us on our app, social media, or at graceandtruthcommunity.com. We love Him because He first loved us.